So this is part A of the Khoodeelaar television channel being broadcast time 140 GMT. And we focus on the latest reports carried by the so-called Free Street newspapers on the evidence presented formally before the COVID inquiry. And the highlights include, of course, the evidence given by former Deputy Permanent Secretary, Deputy Head of the Civil Service. We'll come to the exact description of her former title, Helen MacNamara, and featuring Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson, and in particular, the absolute criminal Matthew Hancock. Let's check on the description of Helen MacNamara. So the wiki entry describes her as a British civil servant who served as the Deputy Cabinet Secretary. That's it, the Deputy Cabinet Secretary in the Cabinet Office from 2020 to 2021. And she previously worked as Deputy Secretary to the Cabinet from January 2019 and was Director General for Propriety and Ethics in 2018. This is the first occurrence of a reference to the word ethics in all these communications and statements. That shows that the UK state, on the whole, is devoid of ethics and morality, which is not surprising. Previous to her role as Director General for Propriety and Ethics, she was the Director General for Housing and Planning in the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. She worked for Jeremy Haywood in the Cabinet Secretariat from 2013 to 2016. That as a director in the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, she worked on the London 2012 Olympic bid and staging of the 2012 Summer Olympics. Earlier in her career, she worked as Principal Private Secretary to Tessa Jowell and was responsible for setting up the Levison inquiry into British media ethics and the subsequent cross party response. MacNamara read history at Clare College, Cambridge. Before joining the civil service, she was a new media entrepreneur. And in 2002, she joined the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, working as principal private secretary to Tessa Jowell. And on London's bid and preparations for the 2012 Olympic Games. In 2010, she was appointed director for media policy and was responsible for the setting up of the Levison inquiry. We shall leave the reference to the Wikipedia entry there. Essentially, what she's being featured as contributing is that she is being promoted in a piece by Alice Thomas in the Times, who is full of praise for her. And Alice Thomas starts the piece on Helen MacNamara. Who is that woman who appeared poised, articulate, and reassuring in her houndstooth suit and sharp bob, hands folded in her lap? When the BBC's Laura Koensberg interviewed the key players in British politics for the State of Chaos, her three-part documentary about the seismic events of the past decade, Helen MacNamara stood out as the star, while ministers, permanent secretaries, and advisors looked increasingly like a trolley park at Tesco on a rainy Saturday morning, manic and unhinged as they talked first about Brexit, then the pandemic, and Partygate. The former Deputy Cabinet Secretary, that is Helen MacNamara, remained calm, rational, and analytical. Now, whatever the reason for her not appearing or being featured so far in the media reports about the government and the state of unfitness fronted by the liar Boris Johnson, two things that are absolutely fundamental as aspects of the corrupt, immoral state of the United Kingdom from her evidence are the fact that there was nobody else. There is so far absolutely no one else who has come anywhere near approximating to what she has been saying about the morality, about the values, about the ethics, and about the duties at all. And secondly, that despite the fact that Dominic Cummings was the main advisor to Boris Johnson, Dominic Cummings has, in effect, echoed what Helen MacNamara has said about the behavior of Boris Johnson. Now, added to that is the aggravating feature, the personality of the health secretary at the time, Matt Hancock. Now, Matt Hancock demanded that he should be able to decide who would die and who would live. That is the starkest possible point that was reached. Now, going back to the piece by Alice Thomas, Here, finally, you felt was a grown up and a professional, a civil servant who was trying to do her job under increasingly strained conditions as Downing Street veered from one prime minister to the next. Why wasn't she running the country when rumors first began about a virus in China? But then you watch Channel 4's Partygate, and MacNamara is there again as head of ethics in number 10. In the drama, she is depicted asking, "Shall I get the karaoke machine?" Surely she was above the suitcases of wine, broken swings, cheese platters, eyesight tests, and birthday cakes. Yet McNamara, according to the Sue Gray report, was the one who procured that karaoke machine for a party on June the 18th, 2020, when she was supposed to be upholding the highest standards of integrity. Why was she encouraging drinking and dancing when she should have been telling staff to go to bed with a mug of cocoa? Everyone else in the country was still observing a strict lockdown. I, that is Alice Thomas, didn't even visit my mother, who was dying in a care home. McNamara was subsequently fined by the Metropolitan Police. Heroine or villain? It's hard to know. In the BBC documentary, the only time she was previously spoken publicly, I'll read that again. In the BBC documentary, the only time she has previously spoken publicly, McNamara explains how, ever since she became a senior civil servant, there never seemed to be a government plan. Her working life after Brexit increasingly felt like a fever dream. As she worked fast for Theresa May and then Boris Johnson, orchestrating changeovers and lecterns, leather jeans, and Peppa Pig world while thinking brace, brace. What people probably never understood is how testy and toxic and unpleasant it got as a place to work, she told Queensberg. I think we do know. Heroine or cunt, according to Dominic Cummings, who was determined to get her sacked, while number 10, with his WhatsApp messages saying, "We cannot keep dealing with this horrific meltdown of the British state while dodging stilettos from that cunt." He added that he wanted to personally handcuff McNamara and escort her out of the building, sounding more 50 Shades of Grey than the thick of it. Yesterday, a poised McNamara, 47, giving evidence at the COVID inquiry, called out Cummings as violent and misogynistic language and painted a grim picture of the macho culture contaminated by ego. In number 10, where the men thought they were alpha enough to take on the pandemic and beat it, unlike those wimpy Italians. She explained that when she went into the Prime Minister's office at the start of the pandemic to tell them, I think we are absolutely fucked. This country is heading for a disaster. The belittled then ridiculed her. I wouldn't be surprised if they threw paper planes at her head and stuck their tongues out behind her back. I'm Team McNamara, that is Alice Thomas. She sounds like the only sane, serious person in number 10 during the entire pandemic, particularly when Johnson nearly died and it became, in her words, a dystopian nightmare. During the one cabinet meeting when McNamara tried to force Downing Street to follow lockdown rules rigorously. Everyone moaned endlessly about it. She was dealing with whiny, needy children. When she kindly asked the health secretary, Matt Hancock, how he was coping, he assured her he was loving the responsibility and having an affair with his aide, we later discovered. He took up a batsman's stance. Matthew Hancock took up a batsman's stance outside the cabinet room and told her, they bowled them at me. I knocked them away. David Brent without the charisma. No one, this senior official suggests, understood anything about the NHS. Everyone was leaking and lying. That needs to be different in the future. Now, this in one piece, summarized by Alice Thomas, of course, in the Times, is the only statement that I have found in all of Fleet Street, in all of Fleet Street, in all the years of studying, examining, diagnosing, analyzing the contents, the role, and the bias of Fleet Street papers. Now, this takes us all the way back again to the narrative under which we broadcast, Baby Angel Geronimo. It is the Baby Angel Geronimo who has been saying all of this, witnessing all of this, at DEFRA, of course, but this is extrapolatable to all these departments and all the sections and personnel. They're all liars, unfit, devoid of morality, and every single one was breaking the rules. MacNamara says there was an absolute, I'll read that again. MacNamara says there was an absence of humanity among Johnson's gang. She certainly appears to be the only one to have shown any compassion, worrying that issues such as domestic abuse, abortion provision, children's mental health, carers, and care homes weren't taken seriously because women's voices were ignored when decisions were being made about ordinary people's concerns. Now, carers, care homes, these are very much within the actual framework of the evidence that is at central to the narrative of the baby angel Geronimo witness and additions and essay. The vulnerable were expendable in this testosterone culture as the female perspective was disregarded, MacNamara told the inquiry. She even sent a text to a cabinet office colleague at the height of the crisis saying, women have died as a result of this. She's exaggerating, you may think. Women have died as a result of this. She's exaggerating, you may say. But only one female cabinet minister fronted a Downing Street pandemic press conference. So, what did man at Downing Street? Again, so what did man of Downing Street talk about while the death toll mounted? Football, hunting, shooting, and fishing, she says. Please, no. I bet they are not even any good at them. They just like the kit. There has been a parade of men at the COVID inquiry who believe they are the real expert while everyone else is useless fuck pigs and morons. And that if they had been given total control, everything would have been different. The deluded, or as Johnson says, part of the orgy of narcissism. Now, he should know about narcissism. He is the narcissist. He is the worst narcissist around. But if MacNamara had been taken more seriously, I, that is Alice Thomas, suspect she could have made a difference. Lee Kane, the former director of communications, laments that the pandemic was the wrong crisis for Johnson. But McNamara didn't have the right skill set. Having read history at Clare College, Cambridge, McNamara joined the civil service in 2002 and was soon helping to prepare London's bid for the Olympics. A permanent secretary explains she was unruffable. Nothing fazed her. She enjoyed being a troubleshooter. In a 2014 event on how women leaders succeed, she spoke enthusiastically about the disruptive power of change and how a crisis creates the power to be disruptive. A government minister described her as a perfect official, fair minded, doesn't play games, will always get at the truth, capable of bringing sense out of five sided talks. Put more simply, she tried to be constructive, whereas Cummings can't help being destructive. She is married to another former civil servant, Alex Towers, who did work at the BBC and is now Director of Policy on Public Affairs at BT. They have four children, but little else is known about her private life. It's easy to see why she finally quit for a short lived senior role at the Premier League, except that that's just more men talking about football. She left in January, and friends say the civil service will always be here, her great love. Unlike most of those giving evidence, she has apologized profusely for her mistake, telling the bereaved gathered at the inquiry that she profoundly regrets procuring the karaoke machine and was mortified for the hurt it has caused. But she still has no qualms about sticking her stiletto into Cummings. I was doing my job as a civil servant, and I was confident about that. She says, come back, Helen. Your country still needs you. That's what Alice Thomas says. But Alice Thomas can be confident about the fact that the narrative, the Baby Angel Geronimo essay narrative, is the only place where more, much more evidential and contextual and factual vindication of the universal values and the truth that have been decried by the liars lot at the government, where Helen MacNamara has been found to have been the only sane one. We have uniquely published and are publishing and are going to continue to publish similar evidence. The point is that the lying, the dishonesty, the callousness that Baby Angel Geronimo has witnessed in the behavior of the so called High Court Judge Griffiths and the High Court Judge Murray and the County Court Judge or District Court Judge Leighton. These are the norms everywhere. Number 10 Downing Street, Cabinet Office, and the Cabinet, and among MPs, of course. And there is no reference, absolutely no reference in the evidence so far given to any concern about the standard, about the rules, about the duties that Helen MacNamara has focused on and has recalled and recited and referred to and remembered. No member of parliament from any party, no member of the cabinet from any party. In fact, the only member of the government, Matt Hancock, demanded to have the right to decide who died, and who lived. Now, where do you begin to condemn that? How do you begin to condemn that? Dystopian nightmare indeed. One of the things that has been recalled to the COVID inquiry about Boris Johnson is that he thought that applying hair dryer into the nose, pumping the hair dryer, playing the hair dryer at the nose, would cure COVID 19. Now, how callous and stupid! So, for anyone mistakenly thinking that they could make pleas to the liars and unfit morons like Boris Johnson about the need to let baby angel Geronimo alone, should consider whether any of the ordinary values, any of the ordinary cognitive concepts was even remotely understood by the likes of Boris Johnson, let alone being able to make a decision about morality or ethics. Okay, so what's happening in the latest so called headlines? So we shall end this particular edition at just under 40 minutes